Well, everyone, not sure who's on yet, but we are going to get started here in a little bit. Um, we have a guest appearance tonight, uh, Kenley. She is my 8-year-old daughter, and she actually has never read or heard the whole story about Benghazi either, have you? No? Can you talk out loud? Okay. I think she's a little shy as well. So, but we are looking forward to a great night tonight. It's our Wednesday night, and I think what we're also thinking about, and we'll make the final announcement at the end. But I'm thinking about doing this again Friday, so we can get 2 chapters done a week. And if anybody has any questions on that, I'd like to know your input as well. But I think we had a great audience last Tuesday. I'm sorry, last Friday. So I think it'd be a great thing to do 2 chapters, get through this book a little bit faster. Also, I know once the quarantine is lifted, we're probably going to lose a lot of people because we're going to be getting back to regular living, or at least a new norm. But so we are going to get this done today. So, what do you think about listening to the story, sweetie? Who you got with you? And who is that? That's Mia. What is Mia? Uh huh. And then who else do you have there? Okay. So we have Mia and Bear as well joining us, and they're going to be in on this as well. Now, what did we get in the mail today? Didn't we get a bunch of? So we are going to have a bunch of these up for sale. There you go. Get her in the picture there. We are going to have a bunch of these up on the website soon for sale, um, and they will be have a vest as well, a small little vest on them that will also have my autograph and also have Roan's paw print on there, or at least a reduced size of her paw print on it as well. So look forward to those. But hey, let's get started. We are on chapter 3 tonight, and it's called The Ambassador. Under a blazing Libyan sun, Chris Stevens flashed his toothy smile, gripped a pair of scissors, and approached a ceremonial red ribbon like he meant business. But before putting the blade to satin, Stevens pulled a signature move. He invited an official from the Libyan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Abdurham al Ghanas, to join him for the honors. With their right hands clasped close together on the scissors, Stevens and al Ghanas snapped the ribbon, triggering an applause from the U.S. Embassy workers and Libyan officials as a clutch of journalists recorded the scene. The occasion was August 26, 2012, reopening of the visa granting consular section of the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli. Including Alganis in the ribbon ritual was classic Stevens. As the American ambassador to Libya in the post Gaddafi era, Stevens considered it essential to promote and protect U.S. interests by working hand in hand, literally and figuratively, with the nascent Libyan government and the people it was supposed to represent. Trust-based bonds and personal connections, Stevens believed, led to successful diplomacy. The reopening of our consular section will create new opportunities for deepening ties between our two countries, he told the gathering. Relationships between governments are important, but relationships between people are the real foundation of mutual understanding. That's why the reopening of our consular section is such an important milestone in relations between our two countries. So my message to Libyan people today is Ahlan wa Salam Bekum, you are welcome to visit America. And there's the door. The ceremony was one of the more public ways Stevens carried out his role as ambassador to Libya. Outside the view of reporters, he met with fellow diplomats and Libyans of high and low station, from government ministers to local officials, powerful businessmen to small shopkeepers, always with the goal of providing Washington policymakers with essential information about the North African hotspot. Often, Stevens' contacts grew so comfortable in his presence that they dispensed with titles altogether and used his first name. The informality pleased Stevens, and the way Arabic speakers said Chris tickled him so much that he signed emails to friends by gently mimicking the pronunciation Chris. Stevens knew that much work remained. When the consular section ceremony ended, he returned to the nonstop chorus of hands-on diplomacy. In the coming days, he'd hold lengthy suit and tie meetings, but he'd also sit barefoot on the floor of the traditional underground Berber house and use his hands to eat a messy plate of barley dough, braised lamb, and tomato stew called bazin. For a brief respite, he'd fly to Stockholm for a friend's white tie wedding, and from there to Vienna for a 2 day getaway. 2 weeks after the ribbon cutting, Stevens would make a homecoming of sorts, his first visit as ambassador to the city where the Libyan revolution began, Benghazi. There are generally two kinds of American ambassadors: high profile business or civic leaders sent to glamour spots like France or Britain as payback for contributions or political support. The workhorses sent to hostile places like Libya as a reward for experience and know how. Chris Stevens exemplified the latter. Born John Christopher Stevens, he was 52, never married, trim and long limbed, and a high forehead crowned with puffy blonde hair turning gray. His blinding smile drew people's attention, but his expressive blue eyes held it. They could flash anger when needed, but more often displayed Stevens' true nature: thoughtful, inquisitive, empathetic, resolved, and patient. Raised in Northern California, Stevens was a saxophone playing son of a lawyer father and a cellist mother. He graduated in 1982 from the University of California at Berkeley with a history degree. He spent 2 years in the Peace Corps teaching English in a remote Atlas Mountains of Morocco, where he fell in love with the region and found his calling. In 1989, he received a law degree from the University of California's Hastings College of Law in San Francisco. Later, he received a master's in national security studies from the National War College. For 2 years after becoming an attorney, Stevens practiced international trade law in Washington, D.C., but his heart was set on the Foreign Service. His focus was the Middle East, and upon joining the State Department, he won stints in Saudi Arabia, Syria, Egypt, and Israel, where he worked on Palestinian issues during the Second Intifada. He became fluent in Arabic and developed a taste for the strong, syrupy tea over which relationships in the region are forged. Between foreign postings, Stevens worked on Middle Eastern policy at the State Department headquarters in Washington and served as a Pearson Fellow with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. In 2007, Stevens was appointed Deputy Chief of Mission, later chargé d'affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli. Within a year of his arrival in Libya, Stevens became the footnote to one of the many strange stories about Gaddafi. A diplomatic cable disclosed by WikiLeaks showed that in August of 2008, Stevens tactfully warned Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice that the Libyan leader had his lecherous eye on her. A self-styled intellectual and philosopher, Stevens wrote to Rice, he has been eagerly anticipating for several years the opportunity to share with you his views on global affairs. During Rice's visit to Libya in September of 2008, Gaddafi confessed that he had a crush on her. Rice later called the attention weird and a bit creepy. You think, huh? Hey, Stevens returned to Washington to run the State Department's official multilateral nuclear and security affairs. But when the Libyan Revolution began in early 2011, the Obama administration wanted an experienced hand to reach out to the rebels. In March of 2011, Stevens became the United States Special Representative to the anti Gaddafi rebels, umbrella political organization, the Libyan Transnational Security Council, the TNC, based in Benghazi. Looks like we lost our guest of honor, Kinley. I think she's ready to move on to other things with this quarantine and all that, having to stay home a lot. She's like a BB in a pop can. So back to the book. With no commercial airlines flying into the war zone, Stevens arranged for a Greek cargo ship to sail from Malta to Benghazi, carrying him, 10 DS agents or diplomatic security agents, and a political attache. The ship's hold bulged with armored vehicles, communications equipment, and supplies needed to establish a temporary diplomatic mission. They arrived on April 5th, 2011. Were you wanting to come back in, sweetie? Okay. Spend a night aboard ship and then set up shop in rooms at the downtown Tibesti Hotel. Rebel leaders in Benghazi frequently met at the Tibesti, but also housed the Italian and the Qatari envoys, United Nations officials, and foreign journalists covering the war. The embassy in Tripoli had suspended operations and evacuated all Americans 6 weeks earlier, so Stevens' arrival made him the highest ranking U.S. diplomat in Libya. He and political officer Nathan Tech immediately scheduled an endless stream of meetings with TNC officials and civic and business leaders to provide U.S. policymakers with information about the rebellion and to keep relationships in anticipation of a post-Gaddafi Libya. As Stevens told the State Department magazine in a story published in December of 2011, they also funneled non-lethal aid to the TNC and created a program in cooperation with the Rebel Council to collect shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles called MANPADS. On June 1st, 2011, an explosion in the Tibesti Hotel parking lot destroyed 2 cars and blew out windows hundreds of feet away. A rebel spokesman described it as an attempt by Gaddafi loyalists to show that they could still strike at will. Soon after, Stevens' security team learned of what U.S. officials described as a credible threat against the special envoy mission and raced to find safer lodgings. On June 21st, 2011, Stevens and his special envoy team moved to a walled sanctuary of blooming guava and palm trees, wide swaths of emerald green lawns, rows of gnarled vines, heavy with purple grapes, and abundant flowers. Located in the western Fuathat neighborhood, the property opened into a gravel street. Its rear wall bordered the 4th Ring Road. Among its convenient charms, the property was across the street from an upscale restaurant called Venezia, which was popular with well-heeled Libyans and the multinational diplomatic corps. Throughout the summer, the one-time private compound was renovated for increased security. By August 2011, it was dubbed the United States Special Mission Compound in Benghazi. The compound covered nearly 8 vibrant acres. One appeal of the property to the diplomatic security staff was that the main buildings were set back far enough from the surrounding walls to protect inhabitants against car bombs. In addition, the DS team arranged for sections of the wall to be reinforced and raised to 9 feet, while some areas remained 8 feet high. A barbed wire crown topped most of the wall's length. Inside and outside the property's 3 gates Rows of concrete jersey barriers were arranged in serpentine patterns to prevent truck or car bombs from crashing through to the compound. Steel traffic bars were installed to control vehicle entrance to the property, which occurred primarily through an imposing main gate in the north wall, topped with spikes and known as Gate C1. To the side of the main vehicle gate entrance was a narrower pedestrian gate. A secondary gate, further east along the same wall, was called B1 or Bravo Gate. The third gate to the compound in the wall opposite the main gate was called Gate C3 and opened out to Fourth Ring Road. Other enhanced security measures on the property included sandbag fortifications, high intensity lighting, explosive detection devices, and an internal defense notification system known as drop and cover alarm in case the compound came under attack. All the buildings were reinforced with security measures, starting with the largest structure on the property, a split level yellow concrete building known as Villa C. Stevens' working and living quarters were there, and it eventually gained an affectionate nickname, Chateau Christopher. Part of Villa C, in the area where several bedrooms were located, was fortified as a safe haven, with locked metal grills on the windows. At the interior entrance to the safe haven area stood a heavy metal gate with double locks that looked like the door to a jail cell. Exterior wooden doors were hardened with steel. For added protection, the safe haven area contained a last refuge safe room, essentially a windowless closet that contained water, medical supplies, and other necessities. A second structure on the east side of the compound was Building B, also known as the Cantina, which contained bedrooms and a dining area. Next door to the cantina was a third building, the Tactical Operations Center, known as the TOC, which served as the security and communications headquarters for the DS agents based at the compound. The fourth and final building on the property was a guest house by the front gate that had been converted into a barracks. It typically housed four armed Libyan security guards, all members of the 17th February militia. Supplementing the militiamen were other locally hired guards, unarmed, who were provided under a contract with a British security company called Blue Mountain Libya. To the uninitiated, the precautions might have seemed impressive, but in the realm of modern diplomatic protection, the special mission compound in Benghazi was only modestly secure. Some might even say insecure in light of recent history and relative to other American diplomatic outposts in hostile places. After the 1983, after the 1983 bombings of the American Embassy and Marine Barracks in Beirut, Lebanon, and the 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, Congress established and strengthened security standards for embassies and consulates. Buildings needed to be engineered to withstand attacks by rocket propelled grenades, and properties required deterrence to prevent hostile forces from entering in mass. The buildings also had to be invulnerable to fire. But the special mission compound in Benghazi was never an embassy or a consulate. Leased at a cost of about a $500,000 a year, it was officially only a temporary residential outpost for American envoys and their DS protectors. The strictest security standards mandated by Congress didn't apply, so the fortifications at the compound were essentially judgment calls. In hindsight, those calls were grossly inadequate. A December 2012 government review concluded that the compound included a weak and very extended perimeter, an incomplete interior fence, no man traps, and unhardened entry gates and doors. Benghazi was also severely under resourced with regard to weapons, ammunition, non-lethal deterrence, and fire safety equipment, including escape masks. Less than 6 months after Stevens and his team moved into the compound, Gaddafi was gone and the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli was reestablished under Ambassador Jean Kretz. Stevens returned to Washington and the special envoy post remained unfilled. In December of 2011, a month after Stevens left Benghazi, a memo circulated around the State Department arguing for a continued presence in Benghazi. One reason for maintaining the compound, the memo argued, was to reassure residents of eastern Libya that the United States would object if the new Tripoli-based government neglected or abused them, as Gaddafi had. Although no new special envoy was chosen to replace Stevens, the Benghazi compound did remain open, overseen by a rotating cast of State Department employees who stayed brief periods, and while there, held the title Principal Officer. In early 2012, Kreitz was nominated to become ambassador to Ghana, and Stevens was a natural choice to replace him. At his confirmation hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Stevens struck a note of optimism. There is a tremendous goodwill for the United States in Libya now. Libyans recognize the key role the United States played in building international support for their uprising against Gaddafi. I saw this gratitude frequently over the months I served in Benghazi. From our engagements with the revolution's leadership and to our early work with civil society and new media organizations. When Stevens was confirmed as ambassador, the State Department featured him in a video that reintroduced him to Libyans. He talked about his upbringing, his education, and his experience, as photos from his earlier days in Libya and other parts of the Arab world flashed on the screen. Now I am excited to return to Libya to continue the great work we've started, Stevens says in the video. Building a solid relationship between the United States and Libya to help you, the Libyan people, achieve your goals. He closed by promising that the two countries would work together to build a free, democratic, prosperous Libya. Stevens' priority would be to win trust rather than points, to gain long-lasting respect rather than superficial concessions. He would defy the stereotypical image of the self-important American ambassador. Instead, Stevens would radiate humility. Armed with his new title, Ambassador Stevens arrived in Tripoli on May 26, 2012. He spent the next 3 months reestablishing relationships from his earlier posting in the capital. But his optimism was tested from the start by instability and violence. From his office in Tripoli, Stevens observed firsthand the deteriorating security situation in Libya during the late spring of 2012. Beyond his concerns about the fledgling Arab democracy, Stevens worried about his staff and himself. In early June, he sent an email to State Department officials in Washington asking that two six-man mobile security detachments, known as MSD teams, of specially trained DS agents be allowed to remain in Libya through the national elections being held in July and August. Stevens wrote that State Department personnel would feel much safer if they could keep two MSD teams with us through this period to support our staff and provide a personal detail for me and the Deputy Chief of Mission and any VIP visitors. The request was denied. Stevens was told because of staffing limitations and other commitments. A month later, on June 9th, 2012, Stevens and the embassy security staff, led by DS agent Eric Nordstrom, asked the State Department to extend the presence of Site Security Team, or SST, that consisted of 16 active duty military special operators. The Defense Department's Africa Command, which oversaw the unit, was willing to extend the team's stay in Tripoli. But State Department officials decided that DS agents and locally hired guards could do the job, and that the SST operators weren't needed. In the weeks that followed, General Carter Ham, head of Africa Commands, twice asked Stevens if he wanted the SST to remain in Libya. Despite his earlier request to extend the team's stay, Stevens wouldn't buck the decision of State Department officials in Washington. He declined Ham's offers and the SST left Libya, even as Stevens moved forward with plans to visit the restive city of Benghazi. However worried he might have been about security, to his staff, Stevens remained outwardly upbeat, even inspirational. He posed for so many photos with Libyan children, grandmothers, local officials, and shopkeepers that embassy staffers half wondered whether anyone in Tripoli didn't have a picture of himself with the American ambassador. On the day on the day in late August of 2012 that Stevens sat on the floor for dinner in a Berber home, his companion was a young Foreign Service officer named Hannah Draper. Several weeks earlier, she'd written a starry eyed blog post about him. Ambassador Stevens is legendary in Libya for spending almost the entire period of the revolution in Benghazi liaisoning with the rebels and leading a skeleton crew of Americans on the ground to support humanitarian efforts and meeting up and coming political leaders. Several Libyans have told me how much it means to them that he stayed here throughout the revolution. Losing friends and suffering privations alongside ordinary Libyans, he could not ask for a better ambassador to represent America during this crucial period in Libyan history. If Draper sounded like an awestruck underling, her blog post reflected a widely held belief among diplomats and officials in Libya and Washington. Chris Stevens had the brains and the courage that made him the right man for the monumental job. A dangerous job, too. 2 days before Stevens and Draper ate their meal of Bazine, the State Department issued a severely worded travel warning for Libya, cautioning that political violence in the form of assassinations and vehicle bombs has increased in both Benghazi and Tripoli. Intermilitia conflict can erupt at any time or any place in the country. Still, Stevens refused to abandon his optimism. He, the whole atmosphere has changed for the better, he wrote in an email to friends and family in the summer of 2012. People smile more and are much more open with foreigners. Americans, French, and British are enjoying unusual popularity. Let's hope it lasts. At least that was his view from Tripoli. When Stevens arrived in Benghazi on September 10th, 2012, more than 9 eventful months had passed since he last set foot in the city. The public highlight of his visit was scheduled to be yet another ribbon cutting, the opening of an American corner, a U.S. government sponsored, friendly, accessible space stocked with bilingual books, magazines, films, posters, guidebooks, and other materials for Libyans to learn about the United States. The Libyan man who ran the school had rescued an American F-15 fighter pilot who had ejected from his doomed plane when it was shot down during the 2011 revolution. Outside public view, Stevens intended to reconnect with old friends and contacts and to solidify relationships with local government officials, business leaders, and fellow foreign diplomats in Benghazi. He seemed to have a clear eye view of the dangers he faced. Militias are power on the ground, he wrote in his diary on September 6th, according to the New York Times. Dicey conditions, including car bombs, attacks on consulate, Stevens continued. Islamist hit list in Benghazi. Me targeted on a prominent website. No more off-compound jogging. For security, 2 DS agents accompanied Stevens from Tripoli. 3 other DS agents were already stationed at the Special Mission Compound. bringing the DS contingent in Benghazi to the whopping number of five. Also at the compound to greet Stevens was a State Department political officer named David McFarland, who'd been serving temporarily at the Benghazi as the Benghazi principal officer. With Stevens' arrival, McFarland would return to Tripoli early the next morning. The final American at the compound was a State Department computer expert who'd arrived a week earlier to ensure that the ambassador would enjoy secure communications. His name was Sean Smith, though many of his friends knew him best as Vile Rat. At 34, Smith had been a State Department employee for a decade. After spending 6 years in the Air Force, married with two young children, he had a close cropped goatee, a wiry smile that turned his eyes into narrow slits, and a legendary reputation in a far corner of the online gaming community. Smith was a master player on EVE Online, a science fiction video game in which characters pilot customized spaceships through thousands of digital galaxies. Although the futuristic fantasy is ostensibly about mineral mining throughout the universe, EVE is a game within a game. The most intense action flows from the political machine, machinations of tens of thousands of paying subscribers arranged into alliances. Smith's online persona and call sign was Vile Rat, a diplomat and spy who manipulated complex relationships on behalf of his alliance, called Goon Swarm. In his real life, Smith was soft featured, clever, and humble. In his fantasy life, his gaming avatar was cunning and looked like Smith's evil doppelganger, with a hawkish nose and a perpetual scowl. The one thing Smith and his avatar had in common was a shaved head. To fill his downtime while in Benghazi, Smith kept in regular touch not only with his family, but also with his fellow EVE players. Now, in addition to 7 Americans, also on the special mission compound, were 3 members of the 17th February militia who lived in the guardhouse slash barracks near the front gate. A fourth militiaman, who normally lived among them, had been absent for several days, citing a family illness. The guard's trustworthiness was suspect at best. During the months prior to the ambassador's visit, a U.S. government review revealed the compound had been vandalized and attacked by some of the same guards who were there to protect it. In addition, on site was a rotating cast of unarmed Libyan guards supplied under the contract with Blue Mountain. 5 were on hand at any given time, working on and off 8-hour around the clock shifts. They opened and closed the gates, operated the metal detectors, and checked bags at the entrance. Their most important role was to patrol the grounds to provide early warning in the event of an attack. I want to highlight that they were there to provide an early warning in the event of an attack. That'll come up again later, I think, in the book, probably. Upon Stevens' arrival at the compound, the resident DS agent showed him the improvements, the security enhancements at Villa C, since he'd last been there 9 months earlier as special envoy. The tour by Stevens' personal security escort, DS agent Scott Wickland, also gave the ambassador a chance to reacquaint himself with the layout of his temporary home in Benghazi. The main area of the spacious villa had an open floor plan of perhaps 2,000 square feet. Beyond the entrance foyer was a modern kitchen and formal dining room to the left, a large entertaining or living room in the corner, and a breakfast nook area toward the right. The well-appointed resident was decorated in a modern, if stodgy, Middle Eastern style, with cushy upholstered chairs and couches and thick Persian rugs spread out on sparkling beige and black marble floors. Oil paintings and ornate sconces graced the walls, and fancy crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Heavy walnut-colored drapes framed the windows, complementing polished dark wood tables and other expensive furnishings. Out back was a swimming pool and a cabana, remnants of the compound's former incarceration as an upscale home. Correction, incarnation as an upscale home. Ultimately, Wicklund led Stephen to the most important part of the villa, the safe haven area. While there, the DS agent instructed the ambassador how to unlock and open the emergency escape windows in his bedroom. Afterward, the DS agents drove Stevens a short distance to the CIA annex, where everyone on the property crowded into Building D's living room to meet the ambassador. Stevens launched into a standard talk about the political and security status in Libya, the progress being made, and the challenges ahead. Jack and several other GRS operators said hello to the ambassador, then zoned out. They found him affable and approachable, friendlier than many of the stiff diplomats and government officials they'd encountered. But they didn't need to know or be told how unstable Benghazi was, or how to be reassured that the situation would eventually improve. When the meeting ended, Stevens and the DS agents returned to the diplomatic compound. At that moment, Benghazi was home to nearly 30 Americans in official capacities, 7 at the Special Mission Compound, and the rest at the CIA Annex. That night, Stevens was scheduled to meet with Benghazi's mayor and city council at the El Fadil Hotel. The meeting was supposed to be private, but council members were so excited by Stevens' presence that they alerted local reporters. That multiplied the security threat exponentially. One of the DS agents protecting Stevens called the annex for backup, telling the operators that the DS didn't have enough agents on hand to protect Stevens at such a high profile public event. The need for added security from the annex operators was equally acute. Correction, was especially acute. At the time of Stevens' visit, the 17th February militiamen at the compound were staging a partial work stoppage. The disgruntled militiamen had refused to accompany the American diplomats' vehicle movements through the city to protest low pay and long working hours. Nevertheless, U.S. officials still officially considered the 17th February Martyrs Brigade to be a quick reaction force in the event of an attack on the compound. A memo dated one day before the ambassador arrived in Benghazi outlined the understanding between the U.S. diplomatic post and the militia. In the event of an attack on the U.S. mission, according to the document obtained later by the Washington Post, the Americans will request additional support from the 17th February Martyrs Brigade. The document said the militiamen would be paid the Libyan equivalents of about $28 per day. The militia fighters would provide their own weapons and ammunition. With the militiamen refusing to protect the ambassador as he moved through Benghazi, Lone and Jack volunteered to accompany Stevens to the September 10th hotel meeting. Their only condition was that they act as shadow security detail, out of sight of reporters and cameramen. Even if they weren't publicly identified as CIA contract operators, a photo of them in the local newspaper would potentially make them targets afterwards. It occurred to Jack that if Al Qaeda sympathizers or a radical Islamist militia wanted to kill the ambassador, neither he nor Roan would make much difference. It wouldn't be a gunfight, Jack thought, but a massive explosion that would take out the Al Fadil Hotel and everything else within a half a block radius. But Jack's fears proved unwarranted, and the event went smoothly. Afterwards, Stevens ate dinner with a prominent hoteler and caterer named Adel Jalul. When the ambassador and his protectors returned safely to their prospective lodgings in the compound and the annex. Before turning in, Stevens jotted a few notes in his diary. excerpts of which were later published by the special operator website sofrep.com. In his lefty scrawl, Stevens wrote, "Back in Benghazi after 9 months. It's a grand feeling, given all the memories of the officials he met at El Fadil," Stevens wrote. "They're an impressive and sincere group of professionals, proud of their service on committees, all working as volunteers. There was a little sourness about why it had taken so long to get to Benghazi, and about ambassadors who came to talk but didn't do anything to follow up. But overall, it was a positive meeting." Stevens also noted an exchange of heated words between his dinner companion, Abdul Jalul, and the ambassador's friend and translator, Bubakar Habib, director of the English Language Skills Center in Benghazi. The subject of the dispute was the Muslim Brotherhood, the political organization determined to see Arab states ruled by strict Islamic law, or Sharia. Stevens didn't tell his diary where he stood on the matter during the dinner debate. Late that same night, September 10th, 2012, Jack and Roan sat together in the living room of the Annex's Building D, watching the Spears and Sandals movie 300 on a big screen TV. The GRS operators enjoyed repeated showings of the blood-soaked story of fearless King Leonidas and his tiny force of Spartan soldiers, outnumbered 10,000 to 1 by the Persian army at Thermopylae in 480 BC. Jack noticed the sculptured beard sported by the actor Gerard Butler, who played the warrior king, closely cropped on the sides, long and full at the chin. He looked at Roan, then at the screen, then back at Roan. "You're trying to grow a 300 beard, aren't you?" Jack asked. Roan kept his eyes on the screen but smiled broadly. "Yep, I sure am." Well, that's the end of chapter 3. I hope you all enjoyed it. I think we will open it up to some questions and answers. Let me check and see what we've gotten here. Okay, we have first, I think Kinley going to come up here and sit with us on this question and answer time. She's back with us. You going to scoot in here so they can see you? There we go. There she is. Joe Garcia. Were you guys ever in contact again with the local that helped you guys out? Unfortunately, myself, I've never been in contact with him. The rest of the guys, I don't believe so either. None of us have ever talked about it. So as of, not sure where he's at, but he's always in our prayers, and the prayers of his family are always in our prayers as well. William Young, does reading the book make you feel some kind of way? Big respect for all of you guys, even the crazy army guy. Right now it doesn't really, and probably a lot of this right now is just because we haven't got into anything that is, a lot of this I wasn't directly involved in. I know the book talks about us all being there with the ambassador, but I was made sure I was busy doing something else that day. I just one of those things. I never. I did everything I could to stay away from the bigwigs when they came into town, because usually it was nothing positive. Next from Sarah. Sarah asked, "What is your everyday carry for gun and knife? Pleasure meeting you at NRA convention, and thank you for your service. Um, well, my everyday carry gun now is a SIG 365, and with a couple backup mags. My favorite knife is a knife given to me by a good friend. It's a short, about a 2.5 inch blade, uh, fixed blade knife that I wear kind of an appendix carry. Um, it was given to me by Victor Marks, who runs All Things Possible Ministries. I want to give a shout out to him. So thank you, Victor, for that, and thank you for that question, Sarah. And it was a pleasure meeting you as well at NRA convention. Uh, Thought we might all get to see each other again this year, but thanks to the coronavirus, that all changed everything for the NRA. Hopefully, we can get that rescheduled and maybe get that in before the end of the year. I know it's very important to us out there. Next, we have Paul Oz. What was your weapons setup when you were in Libya? Well, Paul, I really don't get into a lot of that just because, the way we carry our weapons and kind of the setup that we have. A lot of guys are still over there, and I don't really feel comfortable talking about what a lot of the guys use, do. Most of us are pretty similar in what we carry and how we set our guns up. But it's a great question, and thank you very much for asking that, and thanks for listening in. Um, is that Marta Santiago asks, I may have missed it. How or where was Ambassador Stevens' diary or journal secured? Well, as we talked about in the book, and I think you might have missed it, it kind of went through pretty quick, but uh, as far as I know, there was a group called softrep.com, who is founded, I believe, by a former Navy SEAL and a former Army Ranger. Um, how they obtained that, I don't know. Um, but I guess I'll just leave that one at that. Next, we have Mark Stoller. Mark asks or states, watching the movie 300 seems to be an unknown, foreshadowing of what was to come. Were there any other noticeable telltale signs of trouble coming on the 12th? Uh, you know, there was always little things that would pop up, but most everything that we had then and that night of the 10th and moving on into the 11th was very minimal and was not very particular as to what it would be. There was one report of a threat on government compound, but everything that we had gathered from that was that it was going to be on a Libyan government facility, not a U.S. government facility. Michael Cardenas. Mark, do you know if security details have been given more people and more training since Benghazi? I would assume they would have changed a lot of protocol. And that, Michael, that is one of the issues that, and I was with the State Department at that time, but one of the issues was that a lot of the guys, and I will give my kudos to Scott Wicklund and the other DS agents that were there. They were great guys, and they were just put into a bad situation. They didn't have the training or the experience for what they were put into. Benghazi at that time, from what I know, was used as a facility to get your hardship tour done. A lot of guys to move up in the State Department at the time had to have a hardship tour. And so by going there, spending a month or two, and then coming back to the States, gave them that check in the box. The training that they would get prior to that would be, I believe it was a 6 or 8 week high threat course, and that qualified them to work in a place like Benghazi. What I do know now, or what I have heard, is that 6 or 8 week course has been extended to be a 10 to 12 week course. So they have made some changes, obviously, but Is it enough? In my personal opinion, no. I think that you know you need to be hiring guys that are security first and not diplomats. One of the problems with, in my opinion, is diplomatic security is what it says. It's diplomats who are running security. And what you need there, especially in these high threat critical outposts, are you need guys, you need gunfighters, you need warriors who are security first and worry about being diplomats at a later time. I know that ain't going to go over too well with a lot of the guys, but hey, that's me. Next is Joe Garcia. I would like to know if there was something that happened in Benghazi that you think should have been in the movie or book. Joe, great question. For me, I am very happy with how the movie turned out. The movie did a very great job of sticking to the spirit of the book. And the book, um, that was what we wrote as we lived it. And I get asked that a lot, especially when it comes to when it comes into regard to the political side of things after the fact. When we wrote the book and when we made the movie, we weren't worried about the politics of it. What we wanted to do is make sure that we told the story that wasn't being told, and that was the story that we lived on the ground that night, those 2 nights, those 13 hours. That was far more important than anything politically that could have been said. And lucky for us, the publisher of the book, as well as Michael Bay, wanted to stick to that same philosophy. So thanks for that question, Joe. Excuse me. Um, Marta Santiago asks again, that you know of, are there still documents or memos hidden in the dark swamp of the State Department and or Hillary's hidden documents? Um, I would have to answer that. I do not know. One is I didn't work for the State Department, so I would not have any information regarding that. But I also caveat that with knowing what I do know now, I would not be surprised if there are 30,000 emails that were on a private server that got bleach bitted and hammered down. They probably had carried something that was regard to Benghazi, and I know there's a lot of people out there still looking at getting into that and making sure that that comes to light, which I believe it should. I mean, you know, in my career and the way I look at things, you can delegate your authority, but you can't delegate your responsibility. And if you choose to wear the crown, as they say, heavy is the head that wears the crown. If you're going to wear that crown, you bear the responsibility that goes with it. Lewis asks, sir, if I am not misunderstanding, why the lack of security of the ambassador? And he continues with saludos de Colombia. Well, Luis, thank you very much from Colombia. Thanks for reaching out and watching. Um, why the lack of security? I can only guess at that, Luis. I think a lot of it had to do with the image that the State Department wanted to portray at the time. And it's a guess on my part. I'm just making an assumption, which we all know what those are. But I believe that the with the whole Arab Spring and the way things went with that, the United States at the time, the administration at the time, and the State Department at the time didn't want the Libyans to feel like we were trying to run their country. Wanted them to feel like they were in charge of it and that they were making their effort. And they chose to exercise that by having a low profile with low security. Um, hindsight's 2020, but what having been there, a month to 45 days ahead of time, and as well as the other guys, we knew ourselves that that was not going to be a good enough profile. You can't live that life as State Department. You need to get out there and make sure when you're in those high threat areas that are critical and deemed to be critical, you need to make sure that you make your presence known and make it known that you are strong if you're going to come get us, you're going to get some. You're going to find out that the sheepdog have some teeth. But unfortunately, at that time, the administration and State Department both just chose not to do that. But thanks for joining us from Colombia. Next, we have Jim. Jim asks, at this point in the book, what was your level of concern for the lack of ample security at the compound? And also says, thank you very much. Jim, thank you for asking that question. You know, we, as it depicted in the movie, and we'll get to it in the book as well, you know, prior to the ambassador showing up, we had done a threat assessment for the State Department personnel on the ground of what we thought of their compound. And again, you know, I talk about this often. Is it's 8 acres. If you were trying to defend or protect a diplomat on 8 acres in a environment that has been deemed critical, you know, from my experience in the Marine Corps, you would have at least a reinforced platoon, if not a company of Marines, and you would have the right guys there to be able to make sure if something like that happened, you know, the attack, you were going to give them some fight. You know, having 3 guys there before and only 5 guys on scene during the ambassador's visit to protect 8 acres. I don't care how many Libyan nationals you had there that say they were loyal. As we know, and we'll find out as we read the book, they were the first ones to take off. So, you know, they were left, the State Department guys were left hanging, unfortunately. Marta, back again. Thank you so much. Do you think the work stoppage of the militia guardsmen may have been a possible ploy to further the attack on the embassy? You know, it wouldn't surprise me, but I think, you know, the State Department, they were paying those guys minimal to be putting their life on the line, making them bring their own ammo, their own guns. You know, yeah, um, it is a decent wage for a Libyan at that time. But again, you're asking guys to put their lives on the line for a U.S. ambassador, especially if they're foreign nationals or they are, you know, they're local nationals. You know, I think we could have probably afforded to pay them at least during that time that the ambassador was going to be there. I think I would have gave them a bonus of $100 a day at least. Give them some incentive to want to put their life on the line for us. Unfortunately, no one else at the consulate had that same mentality. But thank you again, Marta, for asking the questions. Keep them coming. Julie Poole, where were you in any other operations that made the news here? No, I wasn't. You know, most of what I did in my time as a contractor in the military, none of that has really been publicized. And not that anything didn't happen, but most of it was pretty. I'll just give you this: it was pretty low key, and it never lasted longer than 13 hours. So, thanks for the question, though. Next, we have Julie Malone. If you could, would you change anything about the book to make it more accurate? You know, Julie, thank you for that question. Great question, but you know, no, we wouldn't. The book is written. How it kind of came about was when we hired the writer, Mitch Zukoff. We couldn't have got a better guy to write the book. He is a phenomenal human being in general, but he took this job to heart. And what he asked is that each one of us tell our story without talking to the other guys. So he wanted our perspective as we lived it that night and during those times on the ground, especially through those 13 hours. And then he was able to meld that together with us after the fact, which you know, there's things that I saw that some of the other guys didn't, and vice versa, which I think with only him writing it could have been as compelling a book as it is. But thank you for that question. Next question, we have Bill George. Do you think Hillary will ever be prosecuted for her omissions and be held accountable for the deaths of our diplomats and GRS force personnel? Um, Bill, you know, I guess the easiest way I can put it this way: she will be held accountable either in this life or the next. Um, she does, she is gonna have to answer to all the evils that occurred. Specifically, I will say that I know of here in Benghazi, but throughout her life, all of us have to pay an account when uh, when we get up there and our name is written in the book, and it's going to tell what we did, what we didn't, and where we go next. And for me, that is the grace and the comfort that is given to me, both as a Christian, having that wonderful faith and love of the Lord. But thanks for that question, Bill. Obviously, the personal side of me, I would love to see her held responsible before then, but there is nothing, no responsibility we can hold her to that God above can't hold her in in far more um, far more trepidation. Um, it looks like I think that's the last question that came in, Bill. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody that joined us tonight. Thank you very much. I hope you'll all be joining us again Friday night, same time. We are going to do another reading and try to see if we can get through this book a little bit faster. And but I want to thank you all so much. And again, I want to remind everybody, if you haven't, I really encourage you to go to shadowwarriorsproject.org and make a donation. Um, we are going to be giving away books to the first 1,000 people who do a reoccurring donation for $20. Um, you'll get a autographed book sent to you directly from me. So I really hope that you guys do that. You're supporting a great cause. You're going to be supporting some families that really need it, and because we got a lot of guys out there that you'll never hear about that are giving their lives and sacrificing time from their families and their lives to make sure that we're safe here at home. So God bless y'all. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again Friday night. Thank you so much. God bless.